Hey chiropractors, we're ready for another modern chiropractic marketing show with Dr. Kevin Christie, where we discuss the latest in marketing strategies, content marketing, direct response marketing, and business development with some of the leading experts in the industry.
Hey docs, welcome to another episode of the Modern Chiropractic Marketing Show. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Christie, and today I have an interview about transformational leadership with Kary Oberbrunner. And I know Kary through Strategic Coach, haven't met personally, but seen a lot of the work he's actually done with Dan Sullivan and Strategic Coach. He's been an instrumental part of their publications of books and different things like that. He's definitely collaborating with Strategic Coach quite a bit. And so I had posted in the Strategic Coach member group about wanting to interview someone on leadership because it's something that I'm doubling down on for myself. I knew over the years it's been somewhat of a weak link, and I wanted to improve that not only for myself, for my patients, for my team, for my family. And so I'm doing a lot to dive into the leadership. And I know a lot of times it's a catch-all term, but we really try to distill it down in this episode. And Kary does a great job of discussing different aspects of leadership, what it is, what it isn't, how you can improve on it. We both believe it's a learned skill. Yeah, there's definitely some people that are born with a little more knack for leadership, but it is a learned skill that you can improve. And really all phases of your life will benefit with that. And so I think you're going to get a lot out of this episode with Kary. I know I did, and it's part of the process that I've started to kind of plan out for myself over this next year is to really improve my overall leadership skills in a vast array of aspects. And one of the things I talk about in this episode, I mentioned it briefly, is that you may not look at yourself as a leader, but think about the leadership and guidance you provide your patients every day. And so if you can do that, you can do it with your team and with your family and with yourself. And so I'm going to challenge you with that. And I think this is a great episode to start the process and start looking introspectively of where maybe you can improve in leadership aspects. Okay. Before we do dive into that, this episode is being released a couple days before our big CSA Money Matters virtual summit. Getting a leadership hold of your finances is a big part of that as well. And it's something that I've done. I recently sent out an email this week regarding what I've done, and we put together a great outline of presenters on all things finances. This is everything from, debt to marketing, ROI, to financial planning, student loan planning, profit first. I mean, you name it, we really dove into a lot of different aspects of finances. We've got 18 presentations for you over the weekend, November 20th and 21st. The good news is if you can't watch all of them this weekend, you can upgrade for a very reasonable $49 for lifetime access and all of the bonuses. And you can register at bit.ly/CSA Money Matters. And you can register for free, and then you can upgrade if you choose to, or you can watch all of them live this weekend. But this is going to really be a great course of finances for you and probably start getting the juices flowing in this whole realm of things. And I do promise you this is not a summit on trying to convince your patients to buy huge, lengthy, expensive treatment plans that they don't need. This is about being a doctor first, but understanding that you can also thrive financially and having some financial wherewithal as the beginning of that and starting to learn where some of your shortcomings may be and to start tackling that over the next couple years. All right. So check that out and register at bit.ly/CSA Money Matters. All right. Welcome to the show, Kary. I really appreciate your time. It was some self-serving requests that I had. I'm really trying to dive into the leadership aspect of things. And so the Strategic Coach Facebook group of members of Strategic Coach was the first place I kind of thought to ask, and you raised your hand. And so I wanted to thank you for that. And before we dive into all things leadership, introduce yourself, professionally and personally, and we'll go from there.
Awesome. So yeah, I love leadership. Absolutely. I actually did a doctorate in transformational leadership, but really from the nonprofit world. I grew up as a aspiring writer and became a pastor in the footsteps of my father. But after doing that for about 12 years, and they say leading a nonprofit army is the toughest because they're not motivated by cash. So we can get into that. I decided to go off and do my books. And so I turned my books into 18 streams of income. Some people started to take notice and say, how in the world are you doing that? I thought books were business cards. How are you turning them into businesses? And then that really launched my publishing company. And now today we actually help people, including Dan Sullivan, take those books and get them all around the world.
Yeah, I've recognized your name quite a bit through social media, not just through the Facebook group of Strategic Coach, but other things where you've done a lot in the publishing world and obviously helping out Dan Sullivan of Strategic Coach. There's a Dan Sullivan, a chiropractor that has nothing to do with this. So sometimes I clarify that for the audience, but you've done a lot with him, and obviously Dan's written a lot of books, and you've been very helpful. Talk about that relationship a little bit and how you've helped him with that.
Sure. And by the way, remind me of our superstar chiropractic author that I'll tell you about too. He's done some really cool things. But with Dan, I basically saw how he was using his mini books as he wanted them to be lead generation tools. But he was only selling them in his Strategic Coach website or his Strategic Coach physical brick and mortar offices. And of course, I was there the first workshop in November of 18. And I said, oh my gosh, these books are meant to be touching the world because we all know that Dan has a back end. And that's really where authors can thrive today. Dan essentially has a Strategic Coach program where the lifetime value of the client is around $40,000. And so the more readers he has at the top of that funnel, the more conversions he's going to have at the bottom of the funnel. So I told Dan, we can get your book into 40,000 channels around the world. And that includes Audible. It includes Canadian brick and mortar bookstores all over the place. And his eyes lit up and he said, well, write an impact filter. So I had to do that. Then I got on a video with him. He was convinced, but then he said, now you got to write an impact filter for Babs, his wife. And so I went through a lot of hurdles, but finally passed the test. And we really prepared Dan for his traditional book launch. We tripled his audience, got him all kinds of traffic. And then when it came time to launch Who Not How, he had this built-in audience in a much bigger way.
I want to touch on a couple things on that. The impact filter for my audience, it's definitely a form of leadership. And I've actually a funny story about that too, was they actually invited me to come. I do a lot with ergonomics. I used to do a lot more with it, but they wanted me to come and do ergonomic assessments for both of their headquarters, obviously Chicago and Toronto. But I had to do an impact filter first to do it, which obviously was really good in gaining clarity. But for the audience listening, it's just a tool where you really got to get clear on what the impact this whatever is going to be, right? This project, this idea. He won't even take a meeting without an impact filter. And so I think it's a huge building block in leadership, right? Can you just speak to that a little bit?
Oh, that's a great topic, Kevin. So one topic is that I'm sure your audience, because they're very, very professional, they're very successful, they probably get a lot of these chats via email, conferences that say, hey, I'd love to pick your brain sometime. And we all are impressed by that after the second time, but then after the third, fourth, fifth, where most people don't want to take your advice, most people just want a free consultation and then they move on unchanged. None of us want that. So what we've implemented in our company is when people say, hey, Kary, I'd love to pick your brain. If I don't know them, my assistant basically says, he'd love to consider that. Could you write an impact filter? And we actually send over an impact filter with instructions, and people can Google that and they can find it online for free. Basically, 90% of people don't even fill it out because they don't want to take that self-leadership. James Allen said, until thought is linked with purpose, there is no intelligent accomplishment. And so if we just have thoughts, but there's no purpose linked, we're really aimless. We're going on a joyride. It's like going on a road trip without a destination. And it's not good for you. It's not good for the other person. So I would encourage people, we found a ton of success. And the 10% who do fill out an impact filter, now you can look at it and often say, oh, wow, this is what they want. Am I the best one to actually help them? And it goes through another filter where if you're not, you refer them on. But if you are, then the conversation is truly valuable. So I love what you said, Kevin. An impact filter really for us as leaders is self-leadership. The purpose of an impact filter is to sell yourself on the idea. And sometimes, Kevin, when I have a great idea, because I'm a visionary, so I have a lot of them, if I look at an impact filter and I say, you know what, it's not worth the time, well, that says something. Because a lot of times we just want to run with the idea, but we haven't put it through a filter.
And I think that's a key distinction for leaders, is that you're going to come up with a lot of these ideas. And then what ends up happening, at least I've found, is when you throw out all these ideas and you talk about it and you have a meeting about it, but then you haven't really sold yourself on it and you don't follow through with that, the next time you actually present an idea you really are behind, your team's not going to be behind it, because they're just going to be like, oh, there's Kevin with another idea that's not going to go anywhere. Right.
That is really good.
Yeah. And that's what I found. And I've had to try to work on that myself, big time. And so I do the impact filter. I got to get better and have my team do it occasionally, but I've gotten better with myself and run it through there, because like you said, if I don't even want to spend the 20, 30 minutes to do it, then obviously it can't be that important.
Absolutely. It's funny. Some of my clients are strategic coach clients, and many times before they get on the call with me, they'll have done an impact filter on, I didn't even ask them to, just because they want to sell themselves on, hey, I should write a book and here's why.
Definitely. And I'll make sure that I have the link to a free download of that from Strategic Coach. It'll be from them. They do hand those out. It's a great tool, but I think that's great. And it's just from an overarching theme, right? It's really providing clarity on decision-making and then implementation of it. And that's what the impact filter is going to do. If the audience has some other way of doing it, just make sure you're obviously handling that.
Yes.
One thing I wanted to go back to earlier, you mentioned I really liked, was non-cash motivation, right? We're in an interesting time where I guess they're calling it the Great Resignation, and we're seeing inflation maybe. We're seeing people wanting more pay for what they're doing. There's a lot of different things going on for sure. And so there's only so much money you can throw at things, right?
Yes.
And so talk to us a little bit about the non-cash motivation and how you found to make some transformations in people, not based around money. Let's put that aside. Let's say, you're paying fairly and all that.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of studies show that people are motivated to a certain level by money, but then once their needs are taken care of, that's not what gets them out of bed every day. I get to go in and make money today. It's really something more transcendent. And it could be the purpose behind it. Of course, we know Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning and how critical that was for people to survive through the concentration camps. But I also think that we're motivated and driven by something. And we had our EOS coach, Entrepreneur Operating System. It's a great conversation and leadership of your company. But one of the first steps they do is they say, develop your core values. And not just your core values that you hang on the wall and say, hey, this is great. But core values really become four things: how you hire, fire, reward, and recognize. So think about that.
Yeah.
If the listener should say, oh my gosh, my core values should be so clear and so important that I literally would fire someone if they didn't match, or I would literally hire someone or reward or recognize. And so, Kevin, we did that.
Mm-hmm.
I would, and by the way, my coach, Jill Young, says we all have core values. Just some of us know what they are and some of us live by them. So everybody here has core values, but they might not be written down. They might not be stated. Your company might not have bought in, your team, but ours are, it spells GPS.
Okay.
And it stands for growth-minded grit, positive optimism, show up filled up, and servant leadership. And I just took my authors and clients through an exercise because we do think core values are this ethereal mystique, and how do we come up with it? But here's what we often say. Think of your ideal clients. Think of 4 or 5 ideal clients. And I'd encourage listeners to do that right now. And we probably all have, like, oh my gosh, it's Jane. And why? Because she shows up on time. She's low maintenance. She always compliments, like you would start listing character traits, and then you go on to the second client and you list character traits. You go to the third, you list you do this for 5 people on a piece of paper. And all of a sudden you start looking and saying, oh my gosh, there's themes. There's themes here. And you know what? You don't get what you want. You get who you are.
Yep.
So that's a great leadership concept, probably from John Maxwell. But we don't get what we want. We get who we are. So if you're producing in your clients XYZ characteristic and there's themes, it's probably because it's a reflection of your culture. And so you never want your core values to be aspirational, like, generosity, but I'm not generous at all. That's not going to work as a core value. So these are things that often are great. And then the other thing you can do is say, what are the things I hate about the really bad clients? And you might say they never keep their word, or they're always complaining. And these become the negative. And then you look at those and say, what if I flipped them? What would be the positive? These are little tips in leading your team through developing your core values.
Yeah. There's a lot of chiropractors complain, and doctors in general complain about their patient base. And I do believe you can cultivate your patient base in the way you want. Now, it's not going to be 100%, but if, 80, 85% of your patients are the type that you like, you're not going to notice the 10 or 15% as much, right?
Yeah.
But when it's flipped, or if you get a certain threshold where you've got too many bad apples in there, it wears on you. But like you said, a lot of times it's a reflection of what your team culture is. And then if your team culture is bad, it's a reflection upon you. And that's ultimately taking that, I guess, that radical acceptance of what your leadership is at that point. And that's something I've tried to work on and say, you know what? I used to have this really bad hiring skill set, like just horrendous. I talk about it all the time. And ultimately it took my wife, who has a background in HR through Saks, and not that she was HR, but she had to do a lot of hiring and stuff. And so she kind of revamped it. And so then we've been really good, and we've got a great team, and we've been focusing on that. But it was just like the hiring that I was doing was a reflection on a lack of a skill set I had. And and it's the same thing with the patients. It's like, for instance, here's one that's always ironic, right? What do you think about when you have to go to the doctor's office and you go in, like, as far as the schedule is going to be? Do you feel like you're going to be seen on time?
I'll tell you what, the stereotype is you're not.
Yeah.
You're going to wait around a lot.
Yeah, like an hour or two. Obviously, well, I should say obviously, but with chiropractic, it's usually not as bad. But I always kind of laugh when doctors will complain when patients are late. And yet,
Mm,
almost every patient, they're 15, 30 minutes behind. It's like, well, you're kind of setting that tone
yes,
already, And I know there can be some issues. There can
sure,
be things that pop up, but if the patient comes into your office 10 times and 8 out of the 10 they were seen on time and the other 2 was like a little bit,
sure.
they forget about those 1 or 2. They're like, oh, okay, something happened. So it's just one of those things. You got to start looking at those things about your patients you're not liking on a grand scale and say, where is that happening in my team? And maybe that's a reflection point on that. All right, Docs, here is a new opportunity for you from Darcy Sullivan of Propel. She is our SEO specialist in helping out many chiropractors with their search engine optimization and making sure Google is finding you and getting you new patients. It's amazing how many new patients chiropractors can get and are getting when they do the SEO right and a few other things. And Darcy is offering a free SEO workshop just for chiropractors, and you can sign up for that at bit.ly/propelmcm. That is bit.ly propelmcm, modern chiropractic marketing, right? And so check out that link, and we're going to have you go over 5 SEO secrets to owning the first page of Google without buying ads. And Darcy's going to give that free workshop, 1 hour, to really help grow your practice and start churning new patients from the ever mighty Google, which is still king in the online marketing. So check that out at bit.ly/propelmcm for the 1 hour free workshop.
That's so true. And I like what you're saying about your skill set not being HR. Neither is mine.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that you're passionate about, I am too, is this who, not how concept of leadership. Meaning,
Mm-hmm.
as leaders, we so often think we have to be the ones to do everything.
Yeah.
And that gets into other issues like, do I have a perfectionist tendency, or do I have lack of trust tendencies? Leadership, I'll tell you why. You and I were chatting before we started about how some of chiropractors, or really all people, just say it's easier to go alone.
Mm-hmm.
Like, forget the team.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, it is easier. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'll tell you what, you can go a lot faster when everyone is either out of the picture or yes men, yes women. But I'll tell you what, you really start delving into this synergistic component of compounding when you basically can say, okay, just because we thought of something to do, I'm not going to be the who. Just because we got the next idea, I don't have to do it all. But where is the how, or who is the who's supposed to do it, rather than how am I going to do it?
Yep.
And I have something on my desktop. I'm going to look at it, Kevin, but it's from Dan Sullivan, and basically it says 3 people are needed in any business: the make it up person, the make it real person, and the make it recur person. And I'll tell you what, there's probably a lot of people like me here who say, oh, I try to do all 3. I try to make it up and make it real and make it recur. And how's that working?
Yeah.
So I've literally had to say, what is my skill set? Let's make it up. And then I need to surround myself with the other 2.
Yeah. We actually just had a whole, I didn't think of it that way, but now that you just mentioned those 3 things, we've launched this app through a company, Kaizenovate, and it's really great. It's working a lot with healthcare providers. And so now our practice has its own app, and it's branded and everything. And so I did a lot of the due diligence, and I talked with Jay Greenstein, who developed it, and his team. And then I got my team involved, and we did group team. And then Dr. Gavea took the lead on kind of making it happen. So
Mm.
that was kind of
You broke it
really,
into sections.
yeah. And then like he's really took the lead on making it happen. And then it really had to get handed off to Kayla at our front to make it
Mm.
recur, because without her and her communication with the patients actually scanning in now, it wouldn't happen. It wouldn't recur.
Yes.
And so, and we had tried launching it before, but I didn't do it the right way in that process you just mentioned. And then we kind of took a step back. We had a little bit of change at the front. We really got all the right people in place, and we said we are going to make this, going back to EOS stuff. We're like, we're going to make this the quarterly rock, and we're not going to rush
Nice.
it. We're not going to like just throw it out there. We're going to do this the right way. And we did it, and we've launched it this week, and then I'm seeing it recur each day, which is really nice. And so it was kind of a cool pass the baton down each
Yes.
time to someone else that could take the next step with it, and it's working out for us.
I love that practical illustration. It's true in sports, uh, doctor's office, you name it.
Yeah, and I would say, one of my flaws in the past was, and this is definitely something that we deal with in our profession, is we have to talk to
Mm.
patients so much, right? Like we may talk to 30, 40 people in a day for
Wow.
8, 10 minutes. It's like, it's a lot of talking. And so then it can be struggle when you have a 10-minute break, or it's between shifts, lunch break, to have another meeting to sit there and talk. And so I'd kind of come back into my, cubby hole back here, and just like tune everybody out and do some patient notes or whatever,
Sure.
and not communicate on things. And so I've recognized that about me. So we've done a good job of scheduling meetings very consistently, so that we're not doing the drive-by delegations, and we're not just
Yes.
kind of like, I have this tendency to walk by the front desk on the way to my office and like mumble a few things to do something, and like people are like, what did you just say?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get better at those things, and self reflect on some of the shortcomings I had to improve that. And it's
Mm.
definitely working, and I'm seeing people fulfill roles and take things to the next step that I didn't before. And
That's
I
so
think
good.
ultimately it was, I think it was my responsibility for sure. All right, we got a new special from Kary up, specific for Modern Chiropractic Marketing listeners. You are going to get 15% off your monthly subscription for your first year with Kary up. And with Kary up, you're going to have access to condition-specific patient reports with online and mobile access, best practices protocols for over 100 conditions with video tutorials, clinic dashboard with key practice stats and outcomes, and auto-generated MD initial and release summaries, plus much more. And I think it's a great supplement to your overall content marketing strategy. And all you need to do is go check out them at bit.ly/ChiroUpMCM, and you can get 15% off for a full year. And if you do that and you email me, kevin@modern-jockey.com, I will throw in a 30-minute consult call with you to go over how you can utilize some of this to supplement your content marketing to help grow your practice. So check that out at bit.ly/ChiroUpMCM, as in Modern Chiropractic Marketing. Check that out for 15% off your yearly subscription. I just want to dive back a little bit about your transition, and obviously you talked about transformational leadership, and the
Yeah.
church is something that is obviously well known for that, and it's amazing always the communication. And would you say, I'm sure there's a few things, but communication has to be the bedrock of leadership? Would you say that?
Mm.
Right.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and so I just want to ask you a question based on that, because not everybody is naturally inclined with communication. So for the audience that is listening and saying, well, I'm not going to be good at providing that type of leadership, this, that, and the other thing, what are some things they can start to really work on for themselves to try to get down that path? Obviously, we're not going to solve it in a 30-minute podcast, but like, what are
Yeah.
some of the things they can do to really try to improve that?
I think it's good to have guidelines around communication. So, for example, we just had our annual meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the top issues was how, as a virtual company, our communication needs to be improved. And let me give you examples. People on multiple time zones.
Yep.
So what is truly office hours and what is not office hours? Because when you're a virtual company and your clients are all over the world, you could literally be working nonstop and trying to serve them. So clearly stated response times. How do I expect you to respond? And everyone has different thoughts. Another thing is mode of communication. Are we using text, phone, Slack, email? This is very important. We have a rule in our company where you do not respond to the team in email. And the reason why is because it's very hard to find. It's very hard to integrate with a to-do. And it's just not the best. So we say Slack is internal messaging. Basecamp is project management. So we kind of have these different rules essentially. Another thing would be that what about copying people? Some people say, oh, I'm just going to copy everyone so they know what's coming. Other people say, why am I being copied on this? I can't stay up with everything. So it honestly comes down to almost like a marriage where there might not be a right or wrong, but you need to communicate expectations. So I think that I actually think Strategic Coach has a form that they say, and anyone could do this, but it's just, how do you prefer to be communicated with? I think it's in their document about virtual strategic assistants.
I remember that.
You remember that?
Yep.
But I just had a new strategic assistant on board and I said, listen, do you want me to do text, phone, voice memo? And I probably asked her more times than she wanted to, especially in the first few weeks. Is this bugging you? Because people they don't want to say, yeah, that's bugging me, but you stretch that out over years and all of a sudden, so preferences are very important.
Yeah, it's a big one. And I was listening to something, I can't recall, but they were talking about there's like a fine line between what should be communicated how, right? Like, you shouldn't text someone about something that really should be face to face,
Ooh,
and you kind of know, right? Like, some things deserve a phone call. Right. Some things deserve, like if you're calling up your parent to tell them something, like exciting, like you're, having a baby, like you don't want to text that to them,
right?
You want to call, or you want to actually be in person if you're
possible.
close, right? And so there's just some things you realize, like, okay, Slack is good for this, email is good for this, a meeting face to face, one-on-one is good for this, a meeting as a team is good for this. This belongs in a weekly meeting, this belongs in a quarterly meeting, right? And like really get clear on your communication, because context can be tough through especially text and email and things like that, if it's important.
Oh man,
right?
There's an example of someone who's no longer with us where she basically, whatever, I'm the CEO and I tell people, look, share my blind spots, come to me anytime. I can take it, I want to grow. But what she did is she basically, on a group email, group text or whatever, she basically, called me out and I said, hey, that's not acceptable. Would you want me to do that to you? I think the golden rule is a great example where before you do something, think, okay, what if someone was doing this to me? How would I want? And that solves a lot of it.
Yeah, absolutely does, for sure. And one of the things I wanted to go back to, we talked about providing leadership, and we've also talked about culture of a team. And I think one of the things that is very challenging about being the leader of a team or of a business is that you have to make difficult decisions sometimes. There's just no way around it, right? And I think it takes a high level of leadership to recognize that maybe one of your team members is not pulling their weight in this culture, right? Like they're starting to erode the culture of the practice, and then it's eroding the culture of the patient care, and that's something like, and it becomes this whole thing that infects like a virus, right? And so what would be your words of wisdom for someone? Because, there's a lot of chiropractors that are owning their practice, and they're only 28 years old, they're 30 years old, they're 32. They don't have a lot of years under their belt, but they're put into this leadership role. What would you say to them about um, the confidence or the courage to make those hard decisions, and how important it actually is to do that for your team? Because you can go, in my opinion, you can go one of two ways with this. If you let that person that's a bad fit in that culture just sit there in that business for a while, it can really impact the rest of them to where you lose some team members. And they can lose faith in you as a leader, versus if you get rid of them, they will actually probably now look at you more as a leadership role. But can you kind of explain how someone can start working on that courage to make those types of decisions?
Yes. So I believe in basically pain, and doctors will understand this very well. There's two types of pain. There's chronic pain and acute pain. Chronic pain is keeping the person around who's toxic. It doesn't hurt all the time. You kind of tolerate it. It's kind of in the background, but every once in a while you realize it's there. And a lot of times people say, I'm just going to live with it. Acute pain is dealing with the person. It is going to hurt. It is intentional. It's focused. It's sharp. But you deal with the acute pain, then you overcome the chronic pain. So I would encourage people and say, listen, pain is inevitable. Misery is a choice. So choose your pain. And there's actually a great book that we were able to publish with Tom Ryan, the head coach wrestling NCAA of Ohio State wrestling coach. But he wrote a book called Chosen Suffering. And it literally says, with the athletic environment, athletes every day have to say, okay, do I want to do the pain of this workout or this rep or this exercise, or do I want the chronic pain of not winning? And I think that every doctor here needs to look in the mirror. I know I do. We recently had some transition. You called it the great resignation. It's true. But it was painful to lose some of these people. But I'll tell you what, being 1 week, 2 weeks in, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so much lighter. We're laughing again. People are, and you said it, the leader will lose confidence and rapport with the followers if they do not eliminate the rats. And that's not my own phrase, but here's what's interesting. Rats spelled backwards is star. So you have these, this is Jill Young. She has a great book where she breaks down employees into 4 different categories: puppies, rats, terrorists, and stars. I think it is. But the, you can turn rats into stars sometimes. But I think you have to be clear. So I would say, if there's a tough conversation, to grow in courage, it's like it's a muscle. Start doing courageous things. And I'll tell you what, Kevin, this is where we get into leadership. I worked out this morning. That was not something I wanted to do. It was early, but I did it. And I'll tell you what gave me confidence. And so you've heard this phrase, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Start inviting courage into your life. Courage to eat right, courage to save right, courage to exercise. And all of a sudden you start building courage, and courage in one area bleeds over into courage in another. And pretty soon you're having fierce conversations with your team.
Yeah, I do think people think courage is a set thing that they have in themselves at whatever age they are, and that's what it is. It's going to be, but it's like you said, a muscle, and you can improve the courage, and then it transcends other aspects of your life for sure.
Absolutely.
So,
And let's face it, courage requires fear.
oh,
Meaning if we didn't fear it, it wouldn't need courage. So I am someone, and I'm sure you are, Kevin, because I can tell a lot about you, but I actually pursue things that make me afraid.
Oh yeah.
So little things, it could be little things, big things, challenges, whatever, my friends are going to France to do cycling. And I quite frankly was scared to do it up until this year, because those are mountains and it's tough. And finally I started training, and now you get courage by training, and you're like, ooh, I did that climb. I could do this. I could do this. It's the same thing with life. Baby steps, back to What About Bob movie. But it does take that baby steps.
And I explained this to a couple of chiropractors before, is that I feel like everybody has shown courage in some aspect of their life. And so I try to get them to reflect upon that and try to go back in time when they did it, or were in that phase where it was fearful, and they had the courage to do it. And an easy one for most chiropractors is the fact that, like, look, you made the huge step to go to chiropractic school, where you were getting into another 4 years of school and like 250,000 in debt, and you didn't know what was going to come of it, but you did whatever you did, had the courage to do that. So kind of reflect on that a little bit, and maybe that'll give them some insights on taking this next step on whatever the courage is needed for them right now.
I love that. That's so good.
Cool. What are a couple of books that you would recommend on this type of topic, that whether it's yours or someone that you've helped to start getting them on the path of improving this overall leadership?
Yeah. So I wrote a book called Unhackable. And the book is really about how today's culture, we are hardwired to lose focus. Smartphones, technology, you name it, everything is built to essentially steal your attention. And it's tough to be a leader when you're not in control of your attention. In fact, I tell people, before people pay for a product or service, they have to pay attention. And so time is really a huge currency today. So I would encourage people to grab the book Unhackable.
Perfect. I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. Then I gotta give some love to my one of my chiropractor clients who's crushing it.
Oh, good.
And it has nothing to do with well, I'll tell you what, it does have something to do with courage, because the quick story is, this gentleman has a great practice. I believe it's Iowa, and he basically was trading time for dollars.
Yeah.
And like probably most chiropractors can understand. Well, he had a patient who moved away and said, his name's Dr. Pat Luce, Luse, and said, you know what, I can't see you anymore. I live 4 hours away. So he took courage, even though I think he's in his 60s. Don't quote me if I offended him, but I think he's in his 60s. But he said, in my 60s, I'm going to take my work and turn it into a book. And he turned it into a book. And now he's able to create passive impact. See, everyone talks about passive income. Yeah. What if you could create passive impact? And then he took that book and turned it into a course called the 7 Systems Plan. And then that course is now turning into certification. And so this is my wheelhouse, taking a book and turning it into 18 streams of income.
Yeah.
But I'm so happy for Dr. Pat, because here he is, a chiropractor who wants to reach more people. The time was the problem, but he had the courage to think bigger. And that's just one example of
that's cool. Yeah, there's I've talked to a few chiropractors that have written a book. A lot of them don't think they can, or there's not an audience for it, and obviously I think they're wrong. And you just got to take that step, right?
Yeah, look at your angle. Leadership, but with chiropractic. It's fascinating. there's probably not a lot of other people in the industry who have that combination. So yeah, I mean, there could be, exercise in chiropractic or stretching in chiropractic. So we really have the opportunity to create a niche.
Yeah, and I want to leave our audience with this kind of thought was that one, you're probably providing a great deal of leadership already to your patients and their health. So you probably
Yes.
already actually have a lot of that skill set. You just now need to do that with your team, right? So
Mm,
that's one. Two, if you're not doing a good job in providing leadership for your patients, that's a problem. And
mm.
so you really want to be working on that and getting better at it so that you can provide leadership for the patients and your team. And ultimately, your practice will grow. And so, leadership isn't just limited, obviously, to yourself or to your team, but also patients and your community. And so, I wanted to leave our audience with that. Before we say goodbye, how could they reach out to you? How could they find you? I know you're in many places, but what are the best for them
Sure.
to reach out?
So my personal website is karyoberbrunner.com, and that's pretty much where my books and courses are. And then our company is ignitingsouls.com, and we are a one-stop shop publishing agency where people can come and turn their messages into 18 streams of income. But Kevin, thank you so much for having me. I think this topic of leadership is so critical in a pandemic world,
Yep.
and your listeners are amazing. And if they like Kevin's podcast, I would say go do a review, because I'm a podcaster, and we need reviews if you like our stuff. So
We
do
do.
that. Do
Thank
that for
you.
Kevin.
I
Yeah,
appreciate it. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for your time and helping us out with this very, very important information.
awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Modern Chiropractic Marketing Show. Before you leave, make sure you check out our website. We've got blogs and podcasts and all kinds of great info at www.modernchiropracticmarketing.com. We also have a closed Facebook group of the same name where a lot of like-minded chiropractors are workshopping ideas and making sure that we have this continual advancement of marketing, business, mindset, and just growth of your practice. So check us out, modernchiropracticmarketing.com, and the Facebook group of the same name.